I fell down the basement stairs on a Wednesday evening in February, and the last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the sound of my own voice echoing off the concrete walls, calling for someone who wasn't there. My neighbor Helen found me 3 hours later when she noticed my porch light hadn't come on at dusk. She said she knew something was wrong the moment she knocked and heard nothing but the television going upstairs. She called 911. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They called my son 19 times on the way to Hamilton General. He never answered once. 2 days later, when I finally opened my eyes in the ICU with a broken hip, 2 fractured ribs, and a bruised kidney, the first face I saw wasn't my son's. It was Rosemary's. She'd been there the entire time, sleeping in a vinyl hospital chair, wearing the same clothes she'd had on when she'd rushed over from her daughter's house in Ancaster the moment Helen called her. And as I lay there trying to understand where I was and what had happened to my body, Rosemary reached over and held my hand. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She hadn't. Not really. The nurse, a young woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Priya, explained what had happened. Fractured neck of femur. Surgery performed the previous morning under general anesthetic. My hip had been repaired with a metal plate and 3 screws. I'd been unconscious through the procedure. My vitals were stable. I was going to be okay. All I could think about was my son. Where was Nathan? Rosemary's expression shifted the way a face does when someone is deciding how much of the truth to give you and in what order. She squeezed my hand a little tighter. "Don't worry about that right now," she said. "Just rest." But I've been a nurse for 34 years. I know what that kind of careful answer means. I've said it myself to patients who weren't ready to hear what was coming. It means the real answer is bad. "They tried calling him," Priya said gently, her voice low, professional. "Many times, left messages. We contacted the emergency number on your file as well." "That's Nathan," I said. She nodded. "Yes." I closed my eyes again and let the morphine and the exhaustion pull me back under, but not before I heard Rosemary in the corner of the room, speaking very quietly into her phone. "He's not answering," she said. "His wife isn't either." "I've tried 6 times. I had met Rosemary 31 years ago on the surgical ward at McMaster University Medical Center, where we were both staff nurses on rotating shifts. She was the first friend I made after Robert and I moved to Hamilton from Sudbury. She came to our housewarming. She was in the pew at Nathan's baptism. She sat with me through every difficult night of Robert's illness, and she was one of 8 people who stood at the graveside the morning we buried him 22 months ago. Rosemary knew my family better than almost anyone, which is why, when I woke again the following afternoon and found her sitting beside me reading a paperback, I didn't hesitate to ask her what she hadn't told me. She set the book down, looked at the window for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and held the screen toward me. My daughter-in-law had posted the night before. Whistler Blackcomb in the background, snow on the mountains, golden hour light catching the glass of wine in her hand. My son stood beside her in a ski jacket I'd never seen, grinning at the camera. In the caption, she'd written, "Finally, time to breathe. No obligations, no pressure, just us in the mountain," and a little red heart emoji. I stared at that photo for a long time without speaking. "Can you scroll?" I asked. Rosemary did. Slowly, carefully. There was a video from that morning, Nathan and my daughter-in-law on a chairlift, laughing about something, the peaks of the coast mountains rolling out behind them in every direction. A photo of fondue at a restaurant that evening. A story my daughter-in-law had posted of herself, wrapped in a resort bathrobe beside a fireplace with a caption that said, "Living her best life." Every single post had been made while I was in intensive care. "I know they had reception," I said. My voice came out flat and strange, like it belonged to someone else. To post all of that. "They had reception." "Yes," Rosemary said. "So they got the calls." She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. The thing is, it wasn't entirely surprising. That was the part I couldn't say out loud for the first 2 days in that hospital bed. It hurt the way things hurt when you've been dreading them without admitting it. When you've been warning yourself with one hand and covering your eyes with the other. Robert died in November of 2022. I won't describe those last weeks except to say they were the kind of weeks that change the shape of your life permanently, that leave a silence behind them that never quite fills in. Nathan came for the last few days. He was there at the end. He handled the funeral arrangements with efficiency and very little emotion, which I understood grief looks different in different people, and Nathan had always kept his feelings close to the chest. I didn't judge him for it. But he left 4 days after the burial. He said Brenda needed to get back. Her mother's birthday was that weekend. There were things at work. I had said it was fine. I understood. I handled everything else alone. The paperwork, the bank accounts, the insurance, the long, airless afternoons in a house that had held 2 people for 38 years and now held 1. I dealt with Robert's clothes and his tools and his record collection and the half-finished birdhouse still sitting on the workbench in the basement, the one he'd been building for our granddaughter Sophie before he got too sick to finish it. I dealt with all of it myself. In the months after, I kept reaching out. I called every Sunday. Sometimes Nathan answered. More often, I got voicemail. I sent Sophie birthday cards with the gift card she liked from Indigo. I asked about her school play, her swimming lessons, her first lost tooth. I was told I'd missed it. I asked if I could take her for a Saturday sometime, just the 2 of us, lunch at the diner she liked, maybe the Royal Botanical Gardens if the weather held. Brenda said they'd have to check the schedule and get back to me. They never did. Last Thanksgiving, I drove 45 minutes to their house in Oakville with a full turkey and 3 pies I'd spent 2 days making. I sat at their table for 3 hours. Nathan was on his phone for most of dinner. Brenda talked about their renovation plans and a cleanse she was doing and a wellness retreat she wanted to book. Sophie sat beside me and drew horses on her placemat and let me braid her hair before dessert, which was the best part of the whole day. I drove home in the dark feeling a hollowness I couldn't name. Christmas, I was told they were going to Brenda's family in Calgary. New Year's, they were at friends in Niagara. I stopped getting invited to Sophie's school events somewhere around February. The calls dropped from weekly to monthly to almost never. When we did speak, Nathan sounded impatient, distracted. Like I was an item on a to-do list he hadn't finished. I told myself he was busy. He'd always been driven, even as a boy. I told myself Brenda wasn't easy to warm up to, but she made my son happy, and that was what mattered. I told myself Sophie was growing up fast, and children that age were naturally more focused on friends than family. I made excuses the way mothers do, steadily and without noticing, because the alternative was admitting that my son had stopped making room for me in his life. Lying in that hospital bed, hooked to monitors, my right hip held together with titanium hardware, I finally stopped making excuses. On day 4, Rosemary went back to my house to pick up some things I needed. Warm socks, my glasses case, my medication list for the nurses. She called me from the front door when she arrived and again when she was about to leave. But before she left, she checked the mailbox. When she came back to the hospital that afternoon, she had my bag in a large envelope. The return address was a law firm in Oakville. The name on the letterhead was someone I'd never heard of. Rosemary set it on the tray table in front of me and sat down without a word. I opened it. Inside was a letter. Formal, careful language. It was dated 10 days earlier, sent from a solicitor's office, addressed to me. It said, "Further to our recent telephone consultation with your son, Nathan Hayes, regarding matters of estate and capacity planning, please find enclosed an information package regarding enduring power of attorney in the province of Ontario. As discussed, this process allows a substitute decision maker to manage property and personal care decisions in the event of." I stopped reading there. My hands had started to shake. There was a form included, pre-filled in several sections, my name, my address, my date of birth, property listed, the house on Erskine Avenue, assessed at market value, vehicles, financial accounts, an RRSP and a TFSA with balances I'd never discussed with my son, a pension from my years with the hospital. Someone had already told this law firm a great deal about my finances, and in the section where the letter asked for context regarding the application, there was a handwritten note attached with a paperclip. In Nathan's handwriting, I recognized it the way you recognize your own child's penmanship, no matter how many years have passed. It said, "Mom lives alone, increasing forgetfulness, has been confused about medications, concerned about her judgment and capacity to manage independently, suggest urgency, increasing forgetfulness, confused about medications." I am 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a registered nurse. I manage my own medications with a weekly pill organizer I've been using without incident for 20 years. I have never, not once, been confused about a medication. Concerned about my judgment, I had passed every cognitive screen my GP had given me without hesitation. I read 3 books a month. I did the Globe and Mail crossword every morning. I volunteered Tuesday afternoons at the Hamilton Public Library's literacy program for adults. My judgment was perfectly fine. This was a lie. A deliberate, documented lie, sent to a lawyer 10 days before I fell down my basement stairs. Rosemary sat very still across from me. "How long?" I asked. "How long what? How long has he been planning this?" She looked at the envelope. "I don't know," she said, "but there's something else." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. "Last week," she said slowly, "while you were still unconscious, I got a phone call from your neighbor, Helen's husband, Frank. He said Nathan had called him a few days before your fall, asked Frank how you seemed, whether you'd been having trouble with the house, whether he'd noticed any signs of confusion or forgetfulness, whether he was worried about you living alone." I stared at her. "Frank thought it was kind," Rosemary said. "Thought Nathan was just being a concerned son. He said he told Nathan you were perfectly fine, actually sharper than most people he knew, and that you'd helped him figure out his new pharmacy app just last month." She paused. "Nathan seemed disappointed with that answer," Frank said. The room felt very quiet. Outside in the hallway, a cart went past. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped steadily. I looked at the law firm's letter lying on the tray table. Then I looked at the form with Nathan's handwritten note still attached. "He needed people to say I was declining," I said. "He was building a case." Rosemary nodded. "So he could get power of attorney, control my finances, my property." Rosemary nodded again. "And then what? Sell the house?" She looked at her hands. "The house on Erskine has gone up a great deal in value since you and Robert bought it," she said carefully. "It's worth close to $1 million now, maybe more. Robert and I had bought that house in 1989 for $112,000. We'd raised Nathan in it. I'd planted the garden in the backyard myself, every spring for 30 years, the lilacs along the fence that bloomed every May, the vegetable beds Robert built from cedar planks the year we retired. We'd sat on that back porch through 35 summers. Nathan had learned to ride his bicycle in that driveway, and now he wanted to take it from me, not to help me, to sell it, to get the money before I had the chance to do anything else with it. I thought about the Caribbean resort photos, the ski chalet photos, the fondue dinner, the bathrobe by the fireplace. I thought about every Sunday call that went to voicemail, every Christmas I'd spent alone in a house that suddenly seemed very large, every excuse I'd made on his behalf for 2 solid years. I thought about Sophie, 8 years old, with Robert's eyes and his exact way of laughing at things, head thrown back, completely unguarded. Sophie, who had drawn horses on my kitchen table, and asked me once why Grandma's house smelled like cookies even when there were no cookies. Because I always keep vanilla in a little dish on the windowsill, I'd told her, and she'd looked at me like that was the most remarkable thing she'd ever heard. Sophie had nothing to do with any of this. She was a child. She had no idea what her father was doing. That was the thing that settled something cold and clear inside me. I closed the envelope, set it on the tray table, looked at Rosemary. "I need to call a lawyer," I said. "My own lawyer, not his." By day 6, I was transferred out of the ICU and into a recovery ward. The physiotherapist came twice daily. I was learning to move with a walker, learning to trust my right side again. My body was cooperating better than expected. The surgeon said I was healing remarkably well for my age, which made me smile, because nurses always make the best patients. We know how recovery works. We don't argue with the process. My lawyer was Patricia Chen, who had handled Robert's estate and who I had known for 12 years. I called her from my hospital bed on a Thursday morning. I explained what had happened. All of it. The 19 calls Nathan hadn't answered. Rosemary in the ICU chair for 5 days, the Whistler ski trip, the law firm letter, the handwritten note, Frank's phone call. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Margaret, this is unfortunately not the first time I've encountered something like this." She walked me through my options. In Ontario, I had every right to revise my will entirely. I could establish a testamentary trust for Sophie that her parents could not access until she turned 19. I could direct the bulk of my estate to charitable organizations. I could remove Nathan entirely from any inheritance. And importantly, she said, I should document my capacity thoroughly and immediately, a formal cognitive assessment on record, so that any future challenge would have no legal foundation. She could have the documents ready within the week. Are you absolutely certain? She asked. This is a permanent decision. I looked at the envelope sitting on my nightstand. I thought about the checked boxes on those power of attorney forms, memory issues, confusion, unsafe living alone. I've never been more certain of anything in my professional or personal life, I told her. Nathan called on a Tuesday, 8 days after I fell. I was back in a rehabilitation unit by then, working with the physiotherapy team, starting to walk with a cane instead of the walker. His name appeared on my screen and I let it ring twice before I answered. He was breathless. Urgent. Mom. Oh my God, Mom, I just saw all the messages. I had no idea. I'd heard that voice before. Polished, practiced. The same voice he used in business meetings. I imagined the voice that sounded like concern but was really just well-managed strategy. Hello, Nathan, I said. Are you okay? What happened? When did this happen? 3 weeks ago, I said, a Wednesday evening in February. I fell on the basement stairs. A pause. 3 weeks? I was in the ICU for several days, I said. Fractured hip, surgery. The paramedics called you 19 times. Another pause. Longer. Mom, we were in Whistler. The reception in the mountains, it's terrible. You have no idea. We barely had service at all. He had enough service to like his wife's posts, I thought. But I didn't say it. We would have come back immediately if we'd known. You know that. Of course we would have. His voice had shifted now, adding a layer of warmth. How are you feeling? Are you comfortable? What do you need? I'll come up right away. I'll bring Sophie. She's been asking about you. Sophie hadn't been asking. I knew that. But I didn't say that either. Come Thursday, I said. 2 o'clock. There's something I need to discuss with you. Estate matters. After my health scare, I want to make sure everything is current and properly arranged. There was a beat of silence. Then his voice changed again, brightened in a way that he probably thought wasn't noticeable. Of course, he said. Absolutely. Whatever you need, Mom, I'll be there. He arrived Thursday at 2 with Brenda, but without Sophie. Sophie had a swimming lesson, he explained quickly. She couldn't miss it. The instructor had a wait list. They were dressed for the office. Brenda in a charcoal blazer and dark jeans, Nathan in a sport coat he'd bought himself for Christmas the year I'd given him money for it. They came into the rehabilitation center meeting room with the posture of people arriving for a business lunch, confident, organized, already mentally counting. Rosemary was already seated when they walked in. Brenda's smile tightened the moment she saw her. What is she doing here? Rosemary is here because I asked her to be, I said. Sit down, please. Nathan and Brenda exchanged a look. They sat. Patricia Chen sat at the head of the table, a leather portfolio open in front of her. She greeted them professionally. Nathan nodded. Brenda straightened her blazer. 15 minutes of polite, surface-level conversation followed. Nathan asked about my recovery, my physiotherapy schedule, whether I was sleeping well. He mentioned the Whistler trip, briefly amazing powder. Sophie had tried skiing for the first time. Brenda had loved the spa. He mentioned it the way you mentioned something you're hoping will be noted and set aside. I let him talk. Then I said, before we get to the estate matter, there are some things I need to say. Nathan smiled, patient, rehearsed. Of course. I held up the law firm envelope from Oakville. The smile didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes did. Brenda's hand moved slightly on the table. I know about this, I said. I said it flat in front of them. I know about the power of attorney application. I know about the phone call to Frank asking whether I seemed confused. I know about the same conversation you had with at least 2 other people in my life. Nathan opened his mouth. I'm not finished. He closed it. I continued. My voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they have had time to settle. I said, I fell down my basement stairs. I was in the ICU for 5 days. You were called 19 times. You did not answer once. You did not call the hospital back. You did not come home. You were in Whistler, posting photographs while I was in surgery. Mom? The paramedics called the emergency number on my hospital file. That's you, Nathan. 19 calls. And then I woke up and Rosemary was there. Rosemary, who had been in that chair for 5 days straight. He glanced at Rosemary with something that was trying to be dismissal but came out as something more uncomfortable. You want to discuss the estate, I said. All right. Let's. Patricia opened the portfolio and cleared her throat. I could see Nathan settle back slightly. Brenda uncrossed her legs and crossed them the other way, a small repositioning of readiness. Two people bracing for good news. Patricia began reading. In the matter of the revised last will and testament of Margaret Ann Hayes, effective this date, she read through the formal language, the provincial probate requirements, the trustee appointments. Then she reached the bequests. To my granddaughter Sophie Rose Hayes, she read, a registered education savings plan contribution of $80,000, managed by the trustee, to be used exclusively for post-secondary education expenses. Parental access to this account is excluded until the beneficiary has reached the age of majority. Nathan's jaw shifted. He was calculating. The estate was worth considerably more than $80,000. Patricia continued. To my dearest friend, Rosemary Kowalski, the sum of $40,000, in recognition of her extraordinary loyalty, her 31 years of genuine friendship, and her willingness to show up when it mattered most. Rosemary made a sound. A small, stunned sound. She turned to me. Margaret. I reached over and squeezed her hand. You slept in a hospital chair for 5 days, I said. In your good coat. You deserved more. That's all I had to work with right now. Nathan's voice had gone flat. What else? Patricia looked down at the portfolio. To the Hamilton Community Foundation, designated for the Hamilton Public Library Adult Literacy Program, $60,000. To the McMaster University Medical Center Nursing Scholarship Fund established in memory of Robert John Hayes, $75,000. To the Street, Joseph's Villa Long-Term Care Volunteer Program, $20,000. Brenda's head turned very slowly toward Nathan. That's, she said. $175,000 to charities, Nathan said. His voice was eerily controlled. Plus the 40 to her, plus the 80 to Sophie. That's almost $300,000, Patricia confirmed evenly. Yes. Then what? Margaret retains the house on Erskine Avenue for her lifetime use, Patricia said, and her RRSP, TFSA, and CPP pension income for personal living expenses. Upon the sale of the property at such time as Margaret chooses, the proceeds will be directed to a charitable remainder trust, the beneficiaries of which are the organizations named above. Nathan stood up. The chair scraped back against the floor, and Brenda flinched. This is insane, he said. Mom, you can't be serious. You can't give everything away. I said, I haven't given everything away. I've given it where it belongs. We're your family. Are you? The room went very quiet. I said, I'd like to talk about what family means for a moment. Family, I said, is your mother lying unconscious in the ICU for 5 days and not answering 19 phone calls. Family is lying to a solicitor about your mother's mental capacity so you can take control of her finances while she's in the hospital. Family is calling her neighbors and asking them to report signs of confusion that don't exist because you need a paper trail. Nathan's face had gone pale. We were worried about you. You live alone. You're 67. 67 is not elderly, I said. I know what elderly looks like. I spent 34 years in a hospital. I'm a retired nurse. I managed cardiac patients, post-surgical recoveries, palliative care. I managed your father's illness for 14 months without a single lapse in judgment. Do not stand in this room and tell me you were worried about my capacity. Brenda touched Nathan's arm. He sat back down. His voice dropped. It's about the house, Mom. We thought maybe something smaller would be better for you. Easier. Something closer to us. You never suggested that to me directly, I said. Not once. You suggested it to a law firm. You suggested it in a handwritten note that listed things that aren't true about my health. There was nothing left to argue with. The evidence was on the table. Patricia had the letter from the Oakville firm. She had the formal cognitive assessment my GP had completed at her request the week before, which Nathan and Brenda had no knowledge of. She had everything properly witnessed and documented. Brenda said, "You're punishing us for one mistake." I looked at her. The Whistler trip was not one mistake, I said. It was the clearest version of a pattern I'd been excusing for 2 years. I missed Robert's first anniversary alone. I spent Christmas alone. I drove to Oakville for Thanksgiving and sat at your table for 3 hours, while my son looked at his phone. I asked to take Sophie for a Saturday and never heard back. I asked to come to her school concert and was told the seating was limited. I paused. "Your mother flew in from Calgary for Sophie's Christmas concert," I said to Brenda. "I was never invited. I didn't find out it happened until February when Sophie mentioned it on the phone. She assumed I knew. She thought I had chosen not to come." Brenda said nothing. I said, "I stopped asking why about 18 months ago. I started accepting that I had become inconvenient. And I kept telling myself that was my problem to manage, that a good mother doesn't burden her children, doesn't make demands, doesn't call too often or need too much. I made myself smaller every year and it didn't matter. You were already gone." Nathan's voice when it came was low and defensive. "Dad always said you'd do this, hold everything over our heads." The words landed harder than I expected. I took a breath. "Your father," I said carefully, "spent 14 months dying and never once asked you to stay a single night longer than you chose to. I was the one who got up at 3 in the morning when the medication wore off. I was the one who learned how to manage the drainage tubes and the oxygen settings and the district nurse visits. I did that because I loved him and because that's what you do for someone you love." I looked at my son. "When it was your father's turn to need us, we both showed up. When it was mine, you went skiing." Nathan stood again. His face was closed and hard and something that looked, beneath all the anger, like shame. "We'll contest this," he said. "There are grounds." Patricia said, "The cognitive assessment is on file with her GP. I have 2 witnesses to the signing. The documentation is thorough. You're welcome to engage your own counsel, of course." I'd estimate the legal costs would run between $15,000 and $30,000, and the odds of success are quite low, given the evidence of undue interest, specifically the power of attorney application your firm sent on your behalf. Nathan looked at her, then at me, then at the envelope on the table. They left without saying goodbye. Brenda's heels on the hallway floor, and then the door, and then silence. Rosemary exhaled slowly. I sat there for a moment with my hands folded in front of me, feeling the strange, clean sensation of something being over that should have ended sooner. I want to tell you the weeks that followed were easy. They weren't. There's no satisfaction in losing a son that feels the way you imagine it should. It's quieter than that. Heavier. I woke some mornings and the house was very still, and I thought about Nathan as a boy, about the years before something shifted in him, about whether I had done anything differently that might have changed the shape of the man he became. I thought about Robert and what he would have made of all of it. But I also thought about Sophie. 8 years old. She hadn't chosen any of this. She didn't know about the lawyer, the power of attorney, the envelope. She knew that her grandmother had been in the hospital, and that she had made a card, and her mother had promised to send it, and then apparently forgotten. 3 weeks after I came home to Erskine Avenue, which I was not selling, which was mine, which would stay mine, Rosemary knocked on my door. She had someone with her. Someone small, wearing a purple coat and rubber boots with frogs on them, carrying a handmade card in both hands. "Hi, Grandma," Sophie said. "I missed you." I knelt down carefully, the way the physiotherapist had taught me, protecting the new hardware in my hip, and I held my granddaughter for a long time. She smelled like her shampoo and something cold from the February air, and just that indescribable Sophiness that had always made Robert laugh, the warm solidity of her, the absolute and uncomplicated way she leaned in. She pulled back and held out the card with 2 hands. "Mom said she'd send it," she said. "But she never did, so I brought it myself." The card had a drawing of a woman in a hospital bed, and a son and a dog, even though I didn't have a dog. At the bottom, in careful capital letters, "Get better, Grandma, I love you." And a row of hearts in red crayon. I put it on the refrigerator immediately, right in the center. Sophie looked around my kitchen. "I know this house," she said. "I've been here lots." "Not enough," I said, "but we're going to fix that." She stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese because it was what she asked for, and we ate at the kitchen table, and she told me about her swimming lessons and the book she was reading at school, and a boy in her class who she claimed with great seriousness was annoying. Rosemary made tea and let Sophie put in the sugar, and they counted the cubes together. After dinner, Sophie found the birdhouse in the basement, the one Robert had started, still sitting on the workbench, and asked what it was. I told her, "Grandpa was building it for you. He didn't get to finish." She looked at it for a long moment. "Can we finish it?" she asked. I said I thought we probably could, between the two of us. The physiotherapy continued through March. My hip healed steadily, ahead of schedule. I started taking short walks again in April, around the neighborhood, then to Gage Park, then along the waterfront trail on the warmer days. I started sleeping through the night somewhere in the third week of March, which I hadn't done since before Robert died. My Tuesdays at the library resumed in April. The program coordinator had kept my spot and seemed genuinely pleased to see me back. 2 of the adult learners I'd been working with had made significant progress, and one of them, a man of about 50 who'd grown up with undiagnosed dyslexia, had just completed his first reading assessment at a grade 8 level. He shook my hand with both of his when I walked in. I got groceries on my own. I drove again. I sat on my back porch and watched the first crocuses come up in March, and then the tulips in April, and in May, as they do every year without fail, the lilacs along the fence bloomed in purple clusters, so dense and fragrant that I stood at the back door and breathed them in for a full minute before I did anything else. Nathan has not called. Sometimes I think about whether he will, whether time and distance will do what confrontation couldn't, whether Brenda's careful management of his emotional life leaves any room for the kind of honest accounting that would have to precede a genuine conversation between us. I don't know the answer. I've stopped needing to. What I know is this: I am 67 years old. I had a fall that could have killed me. I survived a surgery that in another decade of delay might have had a different outcome. I was lying unconscious in a hospital while my son drank wine in a ski chalet, and his wife called it living her best life. And while all of that was happening, Rosemary Kowalski slept in a vinyl chair in the ICU for 5 days straight, in the same clothes, and held my hand when I woke up. That's not a small thing. I've spent enough time in hospitals to know how rarely it happens, how much it costs a person in sleep and discomfort and time, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself but shows up and stays. People who show up and stay are rarer than anyone tells you when you're young. When you find them, you hold on to them. Sophie came back in May. Rosemary brought her again, a Saturday, warm enough to be outside. We planted the vegetable beds together, the 3 of us, and Sophie put in the tomatoes the way Robert used to teach her, one hand on each side of the root ball. We painted the birdhouse in the afternoon blue, because Sophie decided, and who was I to argue? We hung it on the fence post where the lilacs turned the corner. Sophie stepped back and looked at it. "Grandpa would have liked it," she said. "Yes," I said. "He absolutely would have." She slipped her hand into mine, and we stood there in the May afternoon, the lilacs in full bloom and a ridiculous blue birdhouse on the fence post, and the whole long summer still ahead of us. There's a plaque near the entrance of the library where I volunteer on Tuesdays. It says something that I used to walk past without stopping. I stop now. It says, "We do not remember days. We remember moments." I think Robert understood that before I did. He spent his whole life building moments. The birdhouse, the lilacs, the porch in summer, the crossword at the kitchen table. He wasn't a man who needed things to be grand. He needed them to be real. He needed the people in the room to actually be there. I wasted some years trying to be included in the life of someone who had already decided I didn't fit into it. I am not going to waste any more. I still have good years. My hip reminds me every morning what it cost to get them, but it's there, and I am there. And the lilacs are blooming, and my granddaughter thinks blue is the right color for a birdhouse, and Rosemary is coming for tea on Thursday, and I have a book on my nightstand I haven't finished yet. That's enough. More than enough, honestly. It turns out what I needed was never in the places I was looking. It was here the whole time. Right here, in the house on Erskine Avenue, in the garden Robert and I planted together over 30 years, in the people who showed up without being asked. I just had to stop begging to be chosen by someone who had already decided to walk away. That part is over now. The rest of it is mine.